You're listening to the Mezzo Guild podcast.
بس أنا لازم أحسه الأول عشان أقوله.
아직 나의 어색한 한국말이 짤따рат하고 지적하진 말아주세요.
Я хочу с тобой серьезно поговорить.
Really is farragut. No, I can quit this Maldinas a here, sure.
Language learning, made simple. From time to time, people ask me about the constructed language Esperanto. Is it worth learning? What are the benefits of being able to speak it? And will it help me to learn another language? Will it help prep me to be able to learn another language? Well, I'm going to answer these questions today. Now, I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail on the main reasons why I personally have no interest whatsoever in ever learning Esperanto, and why I would personally also not recommend it to anybody, especially people who are inquiring about its so-called benefits. Now, I know that this will probably stir up a beehive. This will probably cause controversy. And, I wish I could say that I'm sorry, but facts just don't care about feelings, about hurt feelings. I don't care if it upsets people when I say this. But I do want to make it clear that if you do love Esperanto, if constructed languages, if Esperanto is something that you're passionate about, then I'm not trying to shoot you down in flames or discourage you here. Okay, it will sound like I am, but I'm not. By all means, pursue what you love. While I'm personally not interested in constructed languages, or we call them conlangs for short, I do understand how they are a fun hobby for people. And, I find a lot of the work that people actually put into the creation of conlangs really, really impressive. I'm very impressed by it. But the reasons that I have for not wanting to learn Esperanto actually have very little to do with it being a conlang, very little to do with it being a constructed language. Or even the pointless, finicky arguments about its vocabulary or its syntax. I have other reasons for not wanting to learn it. Reason number one, Esperanto has always been a means to a political end. It has always been a means to a political end. I always say that if you want to get to the bottom of what any movement is about, or any religion or any political group is about, you look at its founder and its origin first. It tells you everything you want to know. Who developed Esperanto and why was it developed? Now, if you think that Esperanto is just a basic constructed language put together by some language geek back in the 1800s that became really popular, then you're wrong. You're wrong. That's oversimplifying it. I made the mistake of thinking that its purpose was that simple. Unlike other constructed languages, Esperanto is and was 100% ideologically motivated. It was made with a serious political objective in mind, which still drives its propagation even today. The language has always been used as a means to a political end. And this is the reason why, if you study the history of Esperanto, you'll see that in the early 20th century, dictatorships actively sought to suppress it, which is strange when you think about it. I mean, it's a constructed language. Why would a government try to suppress it? But it's because it was a political instrument, basically. The guy who created it, Ludwig Zamenhof, developed a political and religious philosophy, which was basically a cultish offshoot of Judaism. It looked like something straight out of the Communist Manifesto. If you read, you can read this online. It's clear that Zamenhof envisaged his made-up, simplified language as facilitating the breaking down of national and religious identity, and this was something that he despised in his own community. He hated it, and including patriotism, which he regarded as something evil. And he also quite intolerantly spoke of free religious expression as being a barbarity, quote unquote. It's this ideological baggage and taint that's attached to the language, and it turns me off it completely. It turns it off it completely. Even if it wasn't to this day political, even if it was just a language now, but it had that root, that's enough to turn me off it forever. Esperanto is the glossolalia of the faithful. The glossolalia of the language of the faithful. It also explains why so many dedicated Esperantists are by nature politically extreme. You talk to anybody who's a really dedicated hardcore Esperantist, someone who's really right into the Esperanto community, and 9 times out of 10 they are extremely political. It's something that it's a feature characteristic of their community, which gets me to my next point. Number 2, Esperantistan is an ideologically homogenous landscape. Esperantistan is an ideologically homogenous landscape. Wherever you travel in the world, you meet people of all different persuasions. No matter which language you're learning, you'll meet speakers at all ends, both ends of the political spectrum, from the far left to the far right. You meet non-believers, nominal believers, devout believers, and extreme believers of everything. This is a normal thing. This is a human thing. And, the most crucial, we talk about diversity a lot these days, but, the most crucial form of diversity, the most important type of diversity, in my opinion at least, is the diversity of thought and opinion. Diversity of thought and opinion. It's crucial. You have to have it. When you lose that, your society is in big trouble. Now, communities everywhere around the world are filled with people who think very different things to each other, and it's this freedom to think differently, to have a different opinion, a different way of doing things, that defines a healthy society. Esperanto, on the other hand, is, being the ideological tool that it is, totally opposes this. It's by nature, it's against this diversity. So even with constructed languages like, for example, Tolkien Elvish or Na'vi, if you look at the enthusiasts of those languages, you'll find people from a wide array of different ideological backgrounds. They might be totally opposed to each other as far as their opinions of the world are concerned. They might be politically totally different people, but they come together for a common passion, for a common interest that they both share. Esperanto is very different. Now, I'm not saying that there absolutely aren't any learners of Esperanto who don't care about politics or who aren't part of the status quo, but, and I'm sure you could quite easily learn Esperanto without ever losing your mind as someone on the periphery of acceptable thought. But since languages exist to enable us to communicate with a wider community of speakers, it's really important to ask yourself, if you're intending to learn the language, what kind of community am I restricting myself to here? What kind of community am I restricting myself to if I want to communicate in this language? Where's the fun in spending time with ideological clones? I say this all the time, who enjoys sitting in a room full of people who all think the same thing? Boring. Okay, so this gets me to my next point. Number 3, not only does it have no culture, but its adherents are totally delusional about this. It has no culture. Yes, Esperanto has no culture. Without a doubt, the most common and sensible reason why myself and so many other people are totally turned off Esperanto is that it has no authentic culture. Esperanto has no country, no geographical ties to an ancestral homeland. Unlike natural languages, you don't learn Esperanto because you're fascinated by a country, a people group, or a location. There is no Esperantistan. And, outside of a few lunatics, a few crackpots who decided that they wanted to turn their children into circus acts by raising them with Esperanto as a first language, which I think is a really cruel and stupid thing to do, it has no intergenerational identity or national tribal history. So, even with dead languages, with Aboriginal languages, for example, there's still that intergenerational identity attached to it. So there's something there that sort of binds people to it and it makes people want to learn it as part of who they are. It's part of their identity. Esperanto doesn't have that. So it is, in this sense, it's therefore the same as any other conlang, any other constructed language. But if you talk to an Esperantist, they always and very predictably fire back with, You're wrong about that. Actually, we do have a culture, and we have Esperanto music and food and events and literature. They always say this, and to which I always reply that it shows an incredibly shallow and poor understanding of what culture actually is. What is culture? It's not that simple. It's exactly this kind of ignorant interpretation of the term culture that I always denounce. I denounce it all the time when I write. I was taking a look at some of the definitions of culture on the University of Minnesota's Center for Advanced Research on Language Acquisition page. I really encourage you to check that out. If you look at some of the definitions they give, culture, they talk about culture as being intangible aspects of human societies, patterns of behaviors and interactions, cognitive constructs. They describe it as an incredibly deep and multi-layered phenomenon. It's a very deep and multi-layered phenomenon. And so to limit culture to things like music and cuisine is insanely ignorant. It's insanely shallow. And unfortunately, it's indicative of how a lot of modern progressives, a lot of modern liberals treat culture even outside of the Esperanto community. These people limit culture to things like food, clothing, and performances, which means that, ironically, the people who are usually the most vocal about cultural diversity, quote unquote, are also usually the most culturally naive people. Culture is infinitely more complex than kebabs, concerts, and grass skirts. The original goal for Esperanto conflicts with the very nature of human cultures, which serve to separate and distinguish humans as unique groups. Okay, so number 4, my reason number 4, Esperanto evangelists aren't just passionate about the language, they're fanatical about the language. And this is a huge turnoff for me. So yeah, it's the extreme thing. Discussing Esperanto with an Esperantist is like having a theological discussion with a Jehovah's Witness or an animal rights conversation with a PETA activist. These people are fanatical, and they've memorized every single response to every single question. These people, it's almost as if, I know, for example, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have education in there where they actually learn, they study questions. They study every single possible question a person could ask them, and they have memorized to the letter every single response that they have to give. So, I find that Esperantists are kind of the same. They've heard all the questions before. They've heard all the criticisms. They know what to expect, and they have memorized the response for every single thing. They will try to convince you that even the gods themselves speak Esperanto, and they will argue convincingly about it. And it's this extreme zeal that makes everything online written by Esperantists about Esperanto so horrid and unbearable to read. I can't even stand reading it. It bothers me. But again, this comes back to the ideological motivation that drives it. We're not just talking about a language here. We're talking about a political movement. And that's the difference. Yeah, as you probably know, if you know who I am and you follow my blog, you probably know that I'm passionate about the language Arabic. I'm very passionate about Arabic. I love it. And I like to tell people about it, and I like to share my experiences. But, if somebody gives me a reason why they don't like it, and they give me this all the time, or they have no reason to pursue it, I don't go on the offense to try and convince them that Arabic is the greatest linguistic achievement in the history of mankind, the way that Esperantists do. I don't care if you hate Arabic. I don't care. I couldn't give a rat's. But Esperantists are different. They feel the need to defend it. They feel the need to go on the defense and the offense as well. Most Esperantists are self-appointed evangelists. They feel like they have a duty to evangelize for it. Okay, so the next reason is, and this is kind of in response to a lot of polyglots sort of put out this idea that learning Esperanto is helpful to learning other languages. It's like a stepping stone language. It teaches you how to that somehow, like if you've never learned a language before, you should learn Esperanto first. It'll help you get your head around certain things, and then from there you can learn another one. Well, my reasoning here is, my response here is that it might help you learn other languages, but it will do so at the expense of time best spent on the language that's most important to you. So you're, in a sense, you might be helping yourself understand concepts, linguistic concepts, but you're throwing away time. If you want to learn Russian, why would you spend months and months learning Esperanto, getting your head around Esperanto, when you could be putting that time into Russian? It just doesn't really make sense. So any third language you learn is going to be easier than your second language. Your fourth language is going to be a little bit easier than your third, and so on. In fact, the more you learn, the easier it all becomes. And it's for two reasons. Because A, you become familiar with various language families and a wider range of shared vocabulary. And B, your metalinguistic awareness increases. That means you become more aware of certain linguistic features, certain aspects of language. You start to become more and more aware of it. Things start to, when you've never learned a second language before, you've never even really thought about it. You've never thought about concepts, grammar concepts, or how things work. You just use it. But the more languages you learn, the more your awareness of these things increases. So naturally, Esperanto is going to make you more aware of how, especially in the case of Esperanto, it's going to make you more aware of how agglutinative languages work, which is a type of language. But it's not necessarily going to save you any time. And in fact, it's more likely to delay your goals of learning the language that you actually want to learn. It would be, to give you sort of an example, a comparison, it would be like learning the guitar because you really want to learn the violin. So you start with the guitar to sort of get yourself ready and then start learning the violin. Now, yeah, you're going to learn about music theory. You're going to get familiarity with a string instrument that's kind of similar. But at the end of the day, if you spend 6 months learning the guitar, that's 6 months that you could have been investing into the violin. So, and more importantly, this is time that you should be spending. If you're learning Esperanto because you want to learn another language, this is time that you should be spending with your target language community as well. And this is time that you should be using to acculturate. I use this term a lot. My first language, which is Arabic, took years for me to pick up serious momentum, and I was really slow at first because it was my first one. But, those first months and years where I was really struggling a lot, they were also the most important for me. They were the most important, most formative years for me in terms of acculturation. Because the whole process of spending time with the target language community, even though you're grappling with difficult new language concepts, is so incredibly important. And I really feel like that was one of the most important things for me, was that time of just being with the people and learning how they think and how they act and behave. And, it's a very important time. And if you're, it's really crucial. It's really crucial. So, to go and spend that with Esperantists, learn Esperanto, you're missing out on that. You're delaying that. It makes no sense to go and hang out with a political cult like the Esperanto cult and learn a useless constructed language when you should be, when you have an ultimate goal, which is to learn a natural language and a language where there is a real culture and real people group attached to it. It's just epic time wasting. Okay, so my last reason is that Esperanto has failed. It is a failure, a failed experiment. Not that we needed it anyway, not that we needed it for its original purpose. Now, Zamenhof, the founder, the guy who started Esperanto, and his followers envisaged a world where Esperanto was the global second language, the lingua franca, with no baggage and no bias, no political baggage. It's so easy that even an illiterate peasant could pick it up quickly, bridging the communication gap and ultimately breaking down hostility between all peoples. It was supposed to be a true international language. Now, the common argument against this, of course, the obvious argument, is that we already have that. It's called English, and to a lesser extent, the languages like French and Spanish of the former colonies. Esperantists are really, really uncomfortable with this truth, with this fact. They're uncomfortable with the reality that one of the natural byproducts of colonialism was the very thing that they've been trying desperately to achieve. So whatever your thoughts are on colonialism, good, bad, one of the byproducts of colonialism was the fact that we ended up with an international language. We ended up with English. Yes, English is the harder language, more difficult language grammatically, but despite its relative difficulty, it has still accomplished what Esperanto could not. We no longer talk about England as being the final authority on what constitutes correct or incorrect English. There's now American English, there's Australian English, there's New Zealand English, South African English, and linguists now agree that there are many other varieties, such as Indian English, Singaporean English. They're all an authority unto themselves. And the internet is totally unusable, or almost unusable, without English. You need English to use the internet. The Esperanto dream has been fulfilled basically naturally. It's happened on its own, whether they like it or not. And people in every corner of the world are under increasing pressure to learn English in order to function in the 21st century. Now, how you feel about that being good or bad is another thing. But, the fact remains, English has succeeded where Esperanto failed. Now, I am personally opposed to having a global language because I know the effect that it's destroying languages. I mean, we are rapidly losing endangered languages everywhere. And more than half of the current languages are going to be lost by the end of this century, according to projections. But, it's a fact. It's just the way it is. So, for that reason, combined with the fact that we already have an international lingua franca, whether we like it or not, a constructed medium like Esperanto is really unnecessary. So that's it, folks. They're the main reasons at least, why I will not learn Esperanto and why I don't recommend it to people who ask.